I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. The coffee shop smelled like roasted beans and old newspapers, the kind that made mornings feel a little less like mornings. I was hunched over a table by the window, phone buzzing silently in my pocket, half a dozen drafts of texts I'd never sent lingering on the screen. My fingers tapped absent-mindedly against the tabletop, folding the napkin along the crease, unfolding it, folding it again. She was there before me, as usual, sliding into the chair across from the corner by the counter where the light hit just right. I had noticed her weeks ago, her hair tucked behind one ear, a notebook always open, the pen moving slowly even when she wasn't writing. There was a pause in her glance when she looked up at me, and I realized she had noticed me noticing her. "You're drinking the usual?" she asked, voice soft, carrying that odd mix of curiosity and familiarity. Yeah, I said, surprised. I hadn't ordered the same thing 3 times in a row. I hadn't thought anyone was paying attention. "You remembered." She shrugged, just the smallest lift of one shoulder, eyes flicking down her cup, then back at mine. "You always seem like you need it." I laughed, but it was half a laugh. I tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, feeling awkward under her gaze, noticing the way her fingers wrapped around her mug, knuckles white. My eyes caught the small scar on her hand, a tiny line that looked like it had its own history. She glanced away quickly, as if she had caught me staring too long. The place around us hummed with the usual quiet noise, espresso machines, a phone vibrating on the counter, pages turning. I had come in early because I didn't really want to go home, because silence at home was heavier than this hum. People around me seemed alive in a way I wasn't. "So classes?" she asked, voice teasing though barely. "They're fine," I said, then realized that was a lie. They weren't fine. None of it felt fine. I drummed my fingers against the table, watched the condensation drip slowly down the side of my cup. She noticed the pause, but didn't comment. Instead, she tilted her head, a tiny smile playing on her lips, and I felt my chest tighten without knowing why. She laughed softly at something I had muttered under my breath, a joke I didn't even mean to make, and the sound lodged somewhere behind my ribs. My thumb brushed against the edge of my phone. I thought about sending one of the unsent texts I had been staring at all week. I thought about leaving it there, letting it hang like everything else I hadn't said. When she finally stood up, notebook tucked under her arm, she lingered by the table for a beat too long. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. I nodded, words stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. "Yeah, see you." She walked away, shoulders straight, hair catching the light as she turned the corner. I stared after her until the sound of the door closing was swallowed by the hum of espresso machines. My napkin was still folded on the table, edges crisp, untouched, and then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I think I know you better than you think. Froze." The coffee cooled in my hands, and somewhere, in the quiet that had been my routine for so long, a new pulse started. I found her again the next afternoon, crouched by the little garden patch behind the building, hands deep in soil. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that made the air feel a little heavier, like I should notice something but wasn't sure what. "Hey," I said, shifting the weight of the box I was carrying. The soil smelled like rain-damp earth, familiar and sharp. "Hey," she replied, brushing a smudge of dirt off her sleeve. "Care to help? Or are you just here to look distracted?" I laughed, setting the box down. "I can help." We worked in silence at first, planting tiny seedlings into the soft ground. I kept sneaking glances at her, watching the way her fingers pressed the earth around each plant, careful but unhurried. I realized she wore a ring I hadn't noticed before. Simple gold, slightly scratched, like it had lived. My stomach nodded, and I imagined a life she might have had before me, a life that didn't include me at all. "You ever garden?" she asked. "Not really," I admitted. "My mom tried once. I killed everything in her garden." I laughed awkwardly, folding my hands in front of me, hoping she wouldn't notice the tension in my shoulders. She looked at me, eyes soft. "I get it. I used a garden with my daughter before she moved away. I guess some habits just stick, though." Something inside me tightened. I knew her daughter, technically my friend, had probably gone to college and wouldn't recognize the way I was staring now. And yet, There I was, leaning slightly closer than necessary, feeling the gap between us stretch and collapse all at once. We finished planting the seedlings. She handed me the watering can, and I tipped it over each little plant, careful, but my hand lingered too close to hers. The sun dropped behind the building, painting the garden in orange and dusty gold. I felt the quiet weight of her presence, the pull of familiarity mixed with something forbidden. I imagined what it would be like if she touched my arm while laughing, if our hands brushed while carrying the empty pots back. I pushed the thoughts away, guilty, ridiculous, impossible. But still, my chest kept tightening. We paused near the corner of the garden, both catching our breath. The silence was long, but not uncomfortable. She tilted her head, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. My eyes flicked to her hand again, noticing the ring, the tiny scar near her thumb, the way her fingers flexed slightly when she rested her hand on her knee. "Thanks," she said quietly, almost like she had said it to herself. "For helping. Of course," I said, and for a second, we just looked at each other, neither of us moving. I imagined everything I wanted to say, but didn't, and somehow the unspoken felt louder than words. Then she did something small, but it lingered. She brushed her fingers against mine as she handed me the watering can, her eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. A soft smile, unremarkable on the surface, but underneath it felt like recognition, like she had noticed the way I noticed her. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I hadn't meant to stay as long as I did, but the sun had dropped behind the buildings, and the air smelled like wet concrete and fading summer. She was at the small kitchenette in the lobby, pouring herself tea. I lingered near the doorway, hands shoved in my pockets, trying to seem casual. "You drink it black, right?" she asked, voice quiet, like she wasn't sure I was really there. "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. My foot nudged the edge of the rug, and it made that soft, dragging sound. She glanced up, eyes sharp for half a second, then softened. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, knees almost touching. I watched her hands around the mug, fingers flexing, the steam curling up and brushing against her cheek. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words got stuck somewhere, trailing off. There was a knock at the front door. I jumped slightly. She didn't. She tilted her head toward the sound and froze. I realized that the building manager's assistant, a kid from my friend's class, had come to drop off a package. She stood quickly, hand on the counter, and I felt that slight distancing. Her pause, the shift in weight, that tiny step back. I wanted to stay close, wanted to press into that small space we had carved out, but I didn't. Instead, I rearranged the tea towels, pretending the gesture was casual, flicking my eyes toward her hands as they moved, noticing the way her fingers flexed when she leaned against the counter. The package delivery was brief, words exchanged over a quick apology for the intrusion, and she laughed softly, a sound that made my chest tighten and loosen at the same time. I kept my eyes on her, noticing every flicker of expression. She poured the remaining tea, then sat back down on the floor, knees drawn up. "You okay?" I asked, voice trailing off, unsure if I meant the intrusion, her smile, or everything. She nodded, eyes downcast, then flicked them toward me. "Yeah, she paused. "Just thinking." I didn't ask what. I didn't want to. I just leaned closer, inching my shoulder near hers. She didn't move, didn't pull away immediately. The space between us seemed to shrink on its own, a gravity neither of us claimed, both of us hesitant to name. I imagined the brush of her hair against my face, the warmth of her hand if I reached out, the slow tilt of her head. My breath caught. She looked at me, and in that instant I thought she might lean in. I might lean in, and then the moment stopped, suspended. She shifted slightly, setting her cup down, a hand brushing mine lightly as she adjusted her knees. It was nothing, but it was everything. My heart thudded in a way I hadn't expected, and my mouth felt dry, words lost somewhere in the pause. I wanted to say, "I don't know if this is right, but I want to." But I didn't. I just stayed there, shoulder brushing shoulder, silence stretching, fingers almost touching. We were walking down the narrow path behind the building, evening settling like a soft weight over the city. The streetlights flickered on one by one, throwing pale pools of light on a cracked concrete. I kept my hands in my pockets, feeling the chill of the air bite my knuckles, though the walk wasn't long. She walked beside me, her pace slow, measured, like she was testing the rhythm of mine without saying anything. "You were quiet today," she said finally, eyes forward, voice low. I muttered. My eyes flicked toward her, but I didn't hold her gaze. I noticed how her coat fell open slightly, the scarf loose around her neck, the way she tucked a hand in her pocket and kept the other free, brushing against the fabric of her sleeve. Tiny things, but they pulled at my chest. "Thinking about," she prompted, not looking at me. "Nothing." My voice was too quick, too sharp, and I cursed myself immediately. I could feel her noticing, but she didn't say anything. A car passed, lights sweeping across our faces, and I caught the glimmer of something in her eyes. Patience, curiosity, maybe a hint of knowing. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to touch her hand, brush it lightly, see if she flinched or let it linger. But I didn't. I could feel the jealousy rising suddenly, quiet and insidious. Earlier that day, I had seen her laughing with one of the younger tenants, a friendly smile, the way she leaned in just slightly. Nothing inappropriate, but it stung like a splinter. My stomach tightened, guilt following close behind. Why did it matter so much? Why did the little things feel so fragile? I started, voice faltering. My chest felt heavy, lungs tight. I don't like feeling like I'm losing whatever this is. I stopped. The words caught somewhere in the space between us, half-breathed, unfinished. She glanced at me, and for the first time, her guard seemed gone. Her lips parted slightly, the softest pause before any sound came out. I swallowed, heart hammering. I wanted to confess everything, the way I felt when she laughed, the way I imagined brushing past her, the quiet ache I carried like a shadow all day. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not here. Instead, I just kept walking, matching my pace to hers, letting the silence fill the cracks. The city hummed around us, distant cars, the faint echo of a train, a dog barking somewhere far off. And still in that quiet, I felt exposed like a wall had crumbled inside me, just a little. She reached out, just enough for our fingers to brush. It was fleeting, almost accidental, but it burned like fire in my chest. She didn't pull back. Neither did I. We stopped on a bench tucked beneath a flickering lamp. The shadows made her look smaller, and somehow larger at the same time. I wanted to ask, to say, to push everything over the edge. But instead, I leaned back slightly, and the silence hung heavy. And I realized, more than anything, I didn't know if she wanted me to ask at all. Would she? I hadn't seen her for a week. Not at the coffee shop, not in the garden, not in the hallways where we usually pass like shadows brushing against each other. At first, I thought she was busy. She always had something to do, some errand or appointment. But then I noticed the emails went unanswered, her number silent, the light in her apartment across the hall staying off later than usual. When I finally bumped into her in the lobby, it was different. She didn't smile. She nodded, clipped and careful, and I realized she had pulled back deliberately. Her eyes flicked past me, scanning the space as if I weren't there at all. My chest tightened, a sudden ache I hadn't anticipated. "You've been busy?" I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. She shrugged, slow, measured. "Things come up." There was more there, something I could feel but couldn't name. A tension in her jaw, a pause too long between words, a careful curl of her fingers around the strap of her bag. I imagined the life she had outside of this quiet orbit we'd been spinning in. Maybe a past I didn't know, someone she wasn't telling me about. The thought hit like cold water. A child, a partner, a life completely separate from mine. I kept looking, searching, hoping for a sign that the bridge between us wasn't gone. She didn't give one. And then, just as suddenly, she walked past me, leaving the lobby too fast, leaving me with my own silence. I tried to fill it. I drafted texts I never sent, each one crossing some invisible boundary in my mind. "Are you okay? Do you miss me?" I erased them all. I didn't want to look desperate. I didn't want to push. Yet I felt the pull, the ache of her absence like a room left empty. Every day, I went to the cafe at the same hour. She didn't show. I kept her usual table in my peripheral vision, half hoping, half knowing. Each time I imagined her walking in, scarf draped loosely, hair catching the light, I felt that strange mix of hope and dread, the tug of familiarity now laced with uncertainty. I caught myself replaying the last time our fingers brushed, the near confession hanging between us like a suspended note. The memory made my chest tighten, then loosen, then tighten again. My mind spun with questions I didn't ask. Did I scare her? Did I read too much into it? Is this over? And then one night, staring at my phone, I typed a message. Typed it, deleted it, typed it again. I don't know if you want to hear from me, but the words never left the screen. The cursor blinked back at me, impatient and indifferent, a metronome for the silence in my apartment. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The next morning, the cafe was quieter than usual. Her seat remained empty, her cup untouched, and I realized how much space she had taken up, not just in the room, but in the quiet architecture of my thoughts. I sat there, staring at the steam rising from my own drink, letting the hum of the morning go on without her. I found her in the small kitchen of her apartment, the light muted, the evening shadows soft against the walls. She was rinsing a mug, hand steady but slower than usual, as if each motion carried weight. I lingered in the doorway, unsure if I had the right to cross it, unsure if I wanted to. She glanced up, startled, then softened. "You're here." My voice caught. I wanted to speak and stay silent all at once. My hands twisted in my pockets. I could feel the pulse of hesitation threading through every muscle. The week of absence, the unanswered texts, the empty seats, it all pressed down on me, heavy and quiet. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter, eyes meeting mine. No words, just the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the wall clock. I wanted to bridge the space between us, but I also wanted to preserve it, a paradox I couldn't untangle. I didn't know if you wanted me to come, I said finally, voice low, uncertain. Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. I wasn't sure either, she admitted, and the words were fragile, honest. I took a small step closer, noticing the subtle tilt of her head, the way her hair caught the light at the nape of her neck. I wanted to ask everything I kept hidden, but instead, I just said, "I missed this." "You." She blinked, and something in her eyes shifted. Vulnerability, recognition, maybe relief. She leaned slightly against the counter, brushing a fingertip along its edge. She started, then paused. Her breath caught. "I wasn't sure what this was," she whispered, words fractured but enough to fill the room. I nodded, understanding, not needing to define it, not needing to rationalize it. I just nodded and let the pause stretch, letting the weight of what we hadn't said finally settle between us. The quiet pressed in on us, intimate and raw. My hand twitched, half reaching, half withdrawing. She noticed and gave the tiniest tilt of her shoulder, the slightest brush of her sleeve against mine. A small, human gesture that said everything without saying anything. I exhaled slowly. "Okay," I said. Soft, simple, but full. Not the word I had rehearsed in a dozen different ways. Not the word that might have fixed everything. Just okay. She let out a small laugh, breathless, quiet, like she had been holding it in for days. "Okay," she echoed, mirroring me, her voice soft, human, unpolished. We stood like that, the room dim, shadows stretching across the walls, fingers nearly brushing, a shared acknowledgement passing between us. Not resolution, not confession, not a guarantee of tomorrow, just a moment, fragile and real. And somehow that was enough. Weeks had passed. The mornings were cooler, the light in the coffee shop softer, drifting over the same table I had claimed since the first time I saw her there. She arrived around 8:47 a.m., as she always did, scarf loosely draped, hair catching the sun. No grand declaration, no ruse, just her and the quiet familiarity of routine. I pour my black coffee slowly, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. She set her cup down across from mine, the steam curling between us like an unspoken conversation. She didn't smile dramatically, didn't make a fuss. She simply looked at me, eyes steady, and it felt enough. We had settled into a rhythm. The garden was tended, the seedlings growing slowly. The package deliveries came and went without interruption, but the small silences no longer held tension. They held comfort. Sometimes we worked in tandem. Sometimes I watched her, letting her movements linger in my memory. The simple acts, handing me the watering can, brushing a stray hair from her face, passing sugar for the coffee, had become our language. The bench behind the building, where the shadows had once stretched long and threatening, now felt like a shared secret. We sat there without words, letting the breeze move across our skin, shoulders brushing occasionally, fingers almost touching. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. She had told me once, in that quiet kitchen, that she wasn't sure what this was. And I had said nothing, letting it hang. Now, months later, the uncertainty had softened into a presence I could bear. I could be near her without the ache of impossibility, without the guilt pressing against my chest. We had found the space to be ourselves, slow and deliberate, cautious and warm. I noticed small details again, her hand flexing around the mug, a laugh caught halfway in her throat, the way she leaned back into the chair when she trusted someone with her silence. I found myself cherishing these moments because they weren't dramatic. They were real. They were quiet. The city moved on outside, indifferent, sprawling, full of noise and possibility. Inside, the coffee shop hummed with the same background clatter. Espresso machines, the soft shuffle of shoes against tiles, the tick of the wall clock. And in that small, familiar space, I realized that being with her was no longer a risk, no longer a question. It was simply here. She leaned forward slightly, eyes meeting mine, and I caught the faintest curl of her lips. I reached out, and our fingers brushed just enough for a shiver, just enough to remember how fragile beginnings had been. I didn't need to speak. She didn't need to. The moment held. Simple, human, earned. Later, when I walked out of the cafe and felt the sunlight on my back, I remember the first day, how I had watched her hand around that coffee cup. Now they were still the same hands, steady, real, full of quiet meaning. And somehow that was enough.